It was alleged that a woman engaged in immoral acts with a dog to satisfy her desires. Hearing this, the king became furious and immediately summoned the woman to the court. When the woman appeared in the court, she completely rejected these accusations as false and said, "Your Majesty, I have not shown my honour to any man for the past 2 years." The king ordered the royal midwife to examine the woman so the truth could be determined. The royal midwife, with a serious expression, prepared to examine the woman. As soon as the midwife began inspecting the woman's body, the woman screamed in fear and in a trembling voice said, "What is happening?" The midwife, trying to put pressure on the woman, said, "This is necessary to prove your innocence." The woman lowered her eyes and pleaded, "By Allah, this is all a lie. I have committed no such sin." But the midwife paid no attention to her words and continued the examination. After a while, the midwife noticed a few marks on the woman's body. Observing them closely, she said, "Your Majesty, this woman is lying. There are certain marks on her body that indicate she has been involved in an immoral act with an animal." Hearing this, the court fell silent. A mix of anger and astonishment appeared on the king's face. He glared at the woman and in a stern tone asked, "Are these accusations true? Why did you hide the truth?" The woman, trembling, replied, "Your Majesty, I am not lying. These accusations are false." The king took a deep breath and said, "If this is false, then why are you so terrified? Why is your voice trembling?" Rubbing her hands, the woman said, "The marks on my body are actually—" Hearing this, the people present in the court were stunned into silence. The king, in a strict tone, asked, "Tell the truth. Who is responsible for all this?" In a shaky voice, the woman replied, "The person who brought me here." Upon hearing this, the king's rage intensified. He immediately summoned the men who had brought the complaint against the woman and had them presented in the court. They avoided eye contact with one another, and a wave of fear surged through their hearts. There was anger in the king's eyes. He looked like a raging storm. The king stared at each man one by one and asked, "Did you falsely accuse this woman?" For a few moments, complete silence spread across the court. Finally, one man slowly said, "Your Majesty, we have done nothing wrong. We heard this accusation from someone else." The king's face turned red with anger, and he roared, "So, without any investigation, you are making such a serious accusation based on someone else's words?" The men looked at each other, but no one said anything. It was not difficult to tell from the king's sharp gaze that they would be forced to tell the truth. The king glared at the 4 men with furious eyes and said, "Except for the first man, the other 3 should leave the court. You will be informed later." The 3 men, exchanging fearful glances, silently walked out. The king then looked at the first man and said, "You claim that there is a dog in this woman's house, and you have seen everything with your own eyes. Then, tell me, what color is that dog?" Hearing this question, the man's face turned pale. Everyone in the court stared at him with blank expressions. The king, too, was watching him intensely. When he did not respond, the king asked again in a stern voice, "Speak. What color was the dog?" Upon being asked again, the man panicked and stammered, "Your Majesty, the dog was white in color." As soon as this answer was heard, the court fell silent. The king, deep in thought, started staring at the man. He nodded and dismissed him, then summoned the second man. When asked the same question, the second man said, "The dog was khaki-colored." The king nodded again and said, "All right." However, the people in the court began looking at the king with suspicious eyes. When the same question was asked to the third man, he said, "The dog was henna-coloured." Then the fourth man was questioned, and he claimed the dog was black. Upon hearing these varying answers, the king ordered his soldiers, "Bring that dog to the court immediately." The order was carried out at once, and the four men were once again lined up in the court. A short while later, the soldiers arrived, bringing the dog with them. The dog was neither khaki, nor white, nor black, nor henna-coloured, because Allah had created the dog with a mix of all colours. Seeing the dog, the four men began to lower their heads in shame. Their faces clearly showed that their lie had been exposed. The king then turned to the woman, who was looking at him with hopeful eyes. This time, the king asked her, "You claim that you have done nothing wrong with this dog. Then tell me, why are these four men accusing you of such a thing?" With a trembling voice, the woman said, "Your Majesty, I have done nothing to harm anyone. I am used to staying in my home. I neither meet nor talk to any stranger. Yet, despite this, these four men have been after my life. I do not understand what mistake I have made that has led them to treat me this way. They are taking advantage. It had only been a year since my marriage, when my husband passed away, and people began to take undue advantage of this situation." As soon as the woman spoke these words, a deep silence spread across the court. The king stared at the four men in deep thought, while the woman continued to cry. Then she said to the king, "I never went out without a necessary reason, but despite that people would pass remarks on my comings and goings. I knew that living alone in this world would be very difficult for me. I have no brother to protect me, no father's support, and now even my husband is no longer with me. That is why I turned to Allah. I began sharing all my secrets and prayers with him. There was extreme poverty in my house, yet despite that, I never took a wrong step that would lead me to sin. Many people started respecting me because of my piety. Even those who once tried to take advantage of my helplessness stopped doing so. But still, there are some people in this world who do not let a woman live in peace, and among those people are these four men. Your Majesty, during my husband's lifetime, I never once stepped outside the house. He used to handle all matters outside, while I stayed inside, taking care of him and our home. But when my husband passed away due to a severe illness, I confined myself within the four walls of my home and devoted myself to the worship of Allah. Then one day, due to an extremely urgent matter, I had to step out of the house. After completing my task, when I was returning home, I came across a small puppy on the road that was badly injured. I looked around. There was no water available anywhere, and it seemed thirsty. For the sake of Allah's pleasure, I picked up the animal and brought it home. I took care of it, applied medicine to its wounds, and gradually the puppy started to heal. With its presence in my home, I also started to feel less lonely. Whenever I finished my prayers, I would talk to it about my feelings. It felt as if it could understand me like a human. The puppy, like me, stayed inside the house and never went outside. Then one day, I had to step out again for an urgent task. Since there was no man in the house, I had to take care of all matters myself. Every time I went to the market, these four men would stand on the roadside and pass comments at me. One time, they crossed all limits and followed me all the way to my house. I got scared and ran inside, locking the door behind me. Even from inside, I could hear their laughter echoing outside. But it didn't stop there. Whenever I went out, they would harass me, call me names, and insult me. Then, one day, the worst happened. I was at home with the puppy when suddenly a man came to my door and said, "I want to spend time with you." Hearing his voice, I was terrified because I had no idea who he was. I immediately turned him away, telling him this is not a brothel where you can come for such things. Your Majesty, I never saw his face, but I am certain he was one of these 4 men. The next day, another man knocked on my door and in a similar manner tried to tempt me into sin. He said, "I have fallen in love with you. I want to spend time with you. I will give you as much wealth as you want in return." I was in shock. I didn't know who he was. I went near the door and raised my voice, saying, "If you truly love me, then marry me, but I will never do anything wrong with you." Hearing this, the man laughed and said, "I have no issue marrying you, but I already have 4 wives. They all brought me great wealth in dowry. If I marry you, my life will become difficult, but I can shower you with riches. Just don't ask me for marriage." As soon as I heard these words, I refused and shut the door on him. Your Majesty, after that, I became too scared to even step outside. I would sit in my home, crying before Allah, praying for His divine help to free me from these men. But after that day, my house became a target. A crowd started gathering outside my door. People began throwing stones at my home, calling me a disgraceful woman, a courtesan, and all sorts of insults. Leaving my house had become a torment. I couldn't understand why all this was happening to me when I was innocent and had done nothing wrong. As the woman spoke, she broke down into sobs again. Seeing her cry, the king turned toward the 4 men. They were looking down, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Their faces showed hesitation and guilt.
Upon hearing this, the king became furious and said, "This woman is not lying. Rather, it is you who are lying." When the dog was brought into the court, the 4 men and the villagers were all left stunned because the color of the dog was not the same as what the men had claimed. The 4 men now realized that their lie had been exposed. They immediately started pleading before the king with folded hands, saying, "Your Majesty, please forgive us." However, the king looked at them with a gaze filled with anger and said, "You tried to defame a pure and chaste woman. Now, will you confess your truth yourselves, or should I pronounce your punishment directly?" They replied, "No, Your Majesty. Please have mercy. Your Majesty, our intentions were corrupt. When we found out that this woman was young and a widow, that she had no male guardian over her, and that she was also beautiful, we thought, why not take advantage of her? We approached her multiple times regarding this matter, but she was righteous and rejected us every time. One day, when I went to her house with a message to spend the night with her, I heard a dog barking from inside. Hearing this, I was very surprised, realizing that this woman was not living alone, but had a dog with her. At that moment, an idea came to my mind. Why not defame this woman in the entire village by accusing her of committing an immoral act with the dog? Since she was not agreeing to our demands, we decided to teach her a lesson in this way. So, I and my 3 friends together started spreading false rumors in the village that this woman lived with a dog and fulfilled her illicit desires with it. The villagers believed our words, and they also began calling her impure. "Your Majesty, please forgive us. And, O woman, you also forgive us." The king said, "No. Your crime is nothing short of a grave sin, and the only punishment for it is death. You have falsely accused a pure and chaste woman of committing an immoral act." Following the principles of Islamic justice, the king ordered the execution of the 4 men. They were hanged upside down, and the villagers stoned them to death. This incident teaches us that Allah protects His righteous servants and saves them from false accusations. May Allah grant us the ability to stay away from all evils and always walk on the path of truth and justice. Ameen.